The courthouse air smelled like lemon disinfectant and old paper, sharp enough to sting your eyes if you breathed too deep. Lauren Pierce noticed that first, not the judge's seal, not the polished benches, not the 6 attorneys in tailored charcoal suits lined up like a firing squad. Lauren was 9 months pregnant. Her ankles had disappeared into her shoes weeks ago. She wore a thrift store navy dress that her neighbor had hemmed by hand after a late shift, and she kept one palm pressed to the underside of her belly, as if she could physically hold her courage in place. Across the aisle sat Evelyn Carrington, her mother-in-law, in cream silk and pearls that looked like they'd never known sweat. Evelyn's posture was perfect. Her expression said, Lauren was a stain someone forgot to scrub off a white tablecloth. Beside her was Conrad Carrington, Lauren's father-in-law, big shoulders, tight jaw, eyes flicking nervously to a slim folder on his lawyer's table like it was a live wire. Lauren had one attorney, public aid. Ms. Patel, barely 5'2", calm as a nurse in a trauma bay. The clerk called the case. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Lauren stood slowly, one hand on the table, the other on her belly. The baby kicked hard, right under her ribs, like a warning. She didn't sit until the judge did. "This court has reviewed the petition," the judge said, voice flat, tired. "Emergency custody regarding the unborn child." Lauren's throat tightened. The words sounded impossible, like someone claiming ownership of a sunrise. Evelyn's lead attorney stood. "Your Honor, the petitioner is prepared to demonstrate the respondent's instability, lack of family support, and high risk of postpartum psychological impairment." Miss Patel's pen stopped mid-air. Lauren stared at Evelyn. She remembered the night in the penthouse dining room when Evelyn slid a check across polished wood and said quietly, so only Lauren could hear, "You can leave with dignity now, or you can lose that baby in public later." The judge lifted a document, a psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Raymond Harrow. Lauren's stomach turned cold. She had never met Dr. Harrow, not once. A sharp cramp sliced through her abdomen. She grabbed the table edge. Another cramp, stronger. Then warmth spread down her legs. Miss Patel caught her elbow. "Lauren, stay with me." Gasps rippled through the room. A bailiff moved forward. Evelyn's pearls didn't shift. She simply removed her sunglasses, slowly, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. And that's when Lauren felt the hard corner of the dented metal lockbox in her tote, right where she'd hidden it for years. The bailiff leaned close and whispered, "Ma'am, the court has a recording." Lauren Pierce wasn't the kind of woman who drew attention. She'd spent most of her life learning how to take up as little space as possible. Smile, work, pay, apologize, repeat. At 41, she still moved like someone who expected the floor to vanish beneath her if she stepped too hard. She waited tables at St. Bridget's Cafe on Atlantic Avenue, the sort of place where the regulars knew your name and your grief before you ever said it out loud. She worked the early shift because it paid a little more in tips and because it let her finish in time to check on her father. Every afternoon, no matter how swollen her feet were, she stopped at the pharmacy for his heart meds, then climbed the 3 flights to his apartment with grocery bags cutting into her fingers. Her father, Frank Pierce, had been a union electrician before a stroke stole half his words. He still understood everything. That was the cruel part. When Lauren entered his living room, he would point to the framed photo of her mother on the wall like a reminder. Be good. Be steady. Don't cause trouble. Lauren tried. She stretched every dollar until it screamed. She took extra shifts, even when her blood pressure spiked. She kept a handwritten notebook of bills. Rent, gas, prescriptions, prenatal visits, adding and subtracting until the numbers blurred. She refused to ask anyone for help, except once. Just once. And the memory of that phone call still burned. The baby's father had been Charlie Carrington. Gentle, bright, raised in money but hungry for a normal life. He'd promised her she wouldn't face his family alone. Then, the week after she told him she was pregnant, he vanished into silence like someone had yanked him off the earth. No texts, no calls, only a certified letter from a law firm with a marble lobby address, informing her that all communication must be directed through counsel. Lauren never told her father the full truth. She let him think Charlie was busy. She didn't want Frank carrying the shame too. So she smiled, brewed his coffee, and swallowed her fear like bitter medicine. That morning, before court, she felt it. Something off. Not the baby's kicks, not the cramps. A cold certainty, the kind you get right before bad news lands. When she checked her phone, a new voicemail was waiting, from a number labeled Court Security. Lauren's burden wasn't just the baby. It was the math that never worked out, no matter how carefully she wrote it. Her medical file lived in a manila folder under the couch, because she couldn't afford a locking cabinet, and because she didn't trust the mail. Every prenatal visit came with a statement, never a final number, just more fees that arrived like snow, quiet and constant. She still owed for the ambulance ride after her blood pressure scare in month 6, and the hospital billing office had a way of speaking that made you feel guilty for being alive. "We can set up a payment plan," they said, as if the plan was simply to stop needing food. Then there was Frank. Her father insisted he was fine, but fine meant forgetting whether he'd taken his pills, leaving the stove on, and staring at the TV with the sound muted, like he was waiting for someone to translate the world back into words. Lauren bought a weekly pill organizer and labeled it in thick black marker, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, because small systems were how she kept the panic from swallowing her whole. She hadn't told Frank about the Carringtons' lawsuit. Not yet. He would try to stand up for her, and the effort would cost him more than he could pay. So she carried the truth alone. She carried it on her bus rides, in the cafe kitchen, in the long nights when the baby rolled under her ribs and she lay awake listening for her father's cough through the thin apartment walls. Charlie's disappearance made everything worse. No father on record meant no support order. No family meant no witnesses to her life except Ms. Patel and a few cafe regulars who liked her coffee refills. That was what Evelyn wanted, an empty circle around Lauren, a courtroom where money could echo louder than truth. The lockbox stayed in her tote like a secret heartbeat. Her mother's last instruction, "Keep it safe," had become Lauren's religion. She didn't even open it anymore. She just needed to know it was there, proof that something in her life belonged to her and couldn't be taken with a signature. 2 days before court, an envelope appeared under her door. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single printed photo. Lauren leaving St. Bridget's Cafe, shot from across the street. Under it, 3 words in bold type. Unfit, alone, easy. Her hams went numb. She checked the hallway peephole. Nobody. Then her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Don't embarrass yourself tomorrow. Sign or we'll make Frank testify." The next message included her father's exact medication schedule, down to the dosages. Family Court sat in a limestone building that looked like it had been designed to make ordinary people feel small. Outside, February wind snapped at coats and sent grit skittering across the courthouse steps. Inside, the air was too warm, heavy with floor polish and wet wool, like every worry had its own smell. Courtroom 6B was narrow, all dark wood and straight-backed benches. The American flag hung beside the judge's chair, limp and tired. A digital clock glowed red above the door, counting minutes like a warning. On the front wall, a small security camera blinked, steady, unbothered, aimed at the tables where lives were rearranged with paperwork. Lauren's stomach tightened when she spotted the object that mattered most, the courtroom's recording monitor. A flat screen mounted near the clerk's desk, wired into the audio system, where hearings were logged and stored. Every word, every pause, every lie that got careless. People filled in slowly, grandparents with rosary beads, exhausted dads in work boots, young mothers clutching diaper bags like shields. Whispers moved through the benches, and Lauren caught fragments. Unborn custody? That's legal? The rich always win. She kept her chin up anyway, even as her dress felt thinner under the stairs. Miss Patel arrived with a worn briefcase and 2 neatly tabbed folders. She spoke softly, like she didn't want Lauren's fear to overhear. "Breathe through your nose. Answer only what's asked. Let me do the arguing." Lauren nodded, fingers locked around the tote that held the dented lockbox. Then the Carringtons entered. 6 attorneys first, shoulder to shoulder, identical suits, identical confidence. Behind them came Evelyn Carrington, moving like she owned the room and the air inside it. Her hair was flawless, her pearls bright, her sunglasses still on, inside a courtroom, because she could. Conrad Carrington walked beside her, but he didn't look like the man in the glossy society photos. Today he was sweating, his hands kept flexing, opening and closing, as if he couldn't decide whether to fight or flee. He stared at the clerk's desk, then at the recording monitor, then away again. Evelyn leaned toward her lead attorney and murmured something that made him nod too quickly. Lauren felt it. This wasn't just a hearing, this was a performance, a public erasing. The clerk called the case. Chairs scraped. The judge's door opened. Lauren rose, the baby pressing down, and the camera above the wall caught everything. As the judge sat, Evelyn slid a fresh folder across the table, stamped "Sealed" in red. Evelyn Carrington didn't need to raise her voice to control a room. She controlled with silence, with timing, with the way she let people feel her money before they ever saw it. Lauren had met her the first time in the Carrington penthouse on Fifth Avenue, the kind of place where the air smelled like lilies and imported floor wax, and the staff moved like ghosts, trained to pretend you didn't exist. Evelyn stood by the window with a glass of white wine, her silver-blonde hair sharp at the jawline, her smile thin as a paper cut. "You're the waitress," Evelyn said, not as a question. Her eyes traveled over Lauren's hands, the faint burn scar on her wrist from a cafe splatter, the cheap stud earrings. "Charlie has always liked strays." Charlie, sweet, sheltered Charlie, had squeezed Lauren's hand under the table like that could protect her. "Mom, stop," he'd said. "Lauren is my wife." Evelyn's fork clinked against her plate. "A courthouse signature doesn't make a wife in this family," she replied, calm as ice. "It makes a liability." Then Lauren told them about the baby. For half a second, Lauren thought she saw something human flicker in Evelyn's eyes. Grandmother instinct, maybe. But it vanished, replaced by calculations so clean it was almost impressive. Evelyn rose, walked to a sideboard, and slid a manila envelope across the polished table like she was closing a business deal. Inside, a post-nuptial agreement and a check for $50,000. "You'll sign," Evelyn said softly. "You'll end the pregnancy, and you'll disappear. Consider it generous severance." Lauren's stomach turned. "I'm not for sale." Evelyn stepped closer, lowering her voice so only Lauren could hear. "Listen carefully. You have no family, no money, no stable home. I can take that child from you before it draws its first breath, and I will raise it as a Carrington without you." That was Evelyn's motive, plain and ugly. Legacy, status, control. A grandchild as property, the family name as a brand she refused to let a Brooklyn waitress touch. Within 48 hours, Evelyn proved she meant every word. Charlie's credit card stopped working. His health insurance vanished. Interviews evaporated after background checks. It wasn't just punishment, it was isolation by design. When Lauren's blood pressure spiked and the doctor ordered bed rest, Evelyn didn't send help, she sent a process server. And when Lauren refused to fold, Evelyn escalated to the only weapon wealth loves most: paperwork dressed up as truth, a psychological report, a doctor, a label meant to follow Lauren into any courtroom like a stain. In courtroom 6B, Evelyn watched Lauren's water break without blinking. She simply uncapped a pen and tapped it once against the sealed folder, as if the timing pleased her. Then Evelyn nodded at her attorney, and he reached into his briefcase for something shaped like divorce papers. Lauren learned who the Carringtons really were by watching who walked in behind them. The lead attorney had barely finished introducing himself when a man in a grey overcoat slipped through the courtroom doors and took a seat 2 rows back, close enough to hear everything, but far enough to pretend he was just another observer. He was in his late 50s, narrow shoulders, thinning hair combed too carefully, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after seeing it, except Lauren didn't forget faces. Years of waiting tables had trained her to read people fast, what they wanted, what they feared, what they were hiding. The man opened a leather folder and placed a business card on top like a quiet announcement. Dr. Raymond Harrow, Forensic Psychiatry, Court Evaluations. Lauren's mouth went dry. So he was real, not just a name printed on a report, real enough to sit there and watch her water break like it was data. Miss Patel noticed Lauren staring. She leaned in. "That's the doctor who signed the evaluation," she whispered. "They subpoenaed him as their expert." Lauren's hands tightened around the strap of her tote. "I never met him," she mouthed back. "Not once." Across the aisle, Evelyn Carrington turned her head slightly, just enough to follow Lauren's gaze to the doctor. Then Evelyn gave the smallest nod, like a queen granting permission. Dr. Harrow didn't smile. He simply lowered his eyes to his notes and began writing, calm as a man describing weather. That's when Lauren understood the shape of the trap. The Carringtons didn't need truth. They needed authority, a credential, a stamp, a man with a title who could say she was unstable and make it sound scientific. The next accomplice arrived even quieter, a woman in a beige coat, hair pulled back tight, holding a clipboard. She approached the clerk's desk, flashed an ID, and spoke in a low voice. The clerk nodded and handed her a form. The woman glanced at Lauren, once, quick, and her eyes held no sympathy at all. Not even curiosity, just a professional emptiness. Ms. Patel's jaw tightened. "Court services," she murmured. "They're requesting an immediate home assessment. Today." Today. Lauren's heart slammed against her ribs. Her father was alone in that apartment. His pills were laid out on the counter. His dignity was fragile. If strangers walked in with clipboards and questions, he would fold in on himself like paper. Evelyn leaned toward her attorney, whispering as if discussing seating at a charity dinner. The attorney stood again, voice smooth. "Your Honor, given the respondent's medical episode, we request immediate intervention for the child's safety." Lauren realized this wasn't just a custody fight. It was a coordinated takedown. Doctor, court services, paperwork, closing from every side. And then Dr. Harrow finally looked up. He studied Lauren's belly, her thrift store dress, her shaking hands, and wrote one more line. He didn't see a mother, he saw an easy case, and Evelyn saw a prize. Lauren's contractions came in waves, but Evelyn's lawyer acted like her body was just inconvenient background noise. "Your Honor," he said, standing with a smooth smile, "we request immediate temporary custody orders upon delivery, due to the respondent's demonstrated instability." Lauren's cheeks burned. Instability sounded polite, but everyone in that room heard what it really meant. Poor, alone, disposable. Miss Patel rose. "My client's water broke in court. That is not evidence of instability. That is biology." Evelyn's attorney didn't even glance at Miss Patel. He angled his words toward the judge, like Lauren wasn't worth eye contact. "Respectfully, Your Honor, the respondent has a history of childhood trauma, lacks family support, and works in an environment that is, frankly, not suitable for an infant. A diner waitress on her feet all day, unpredictable income, no reliable childcare." The word diner landed like a slap. A woman on the bench behind Lauren whispered, "That's cruel." But the whisper wasn't loud enough to matter. Evelyn finally spoke, calm and clear. "Lauren, I offered you a peaceful solution months ago. You refused. Now you're forcing the court, and everyone here, to watch you fall apart." Lauren's throat tightened. She remembered refilling coffee for men who snapped their fingers at her, remembered smiling through insults because rent was due. But this wasn't a table of strangers. This was her baby's future being auctioned with legal language. The judge looked down at the sealed folder. "Dr. Harrow, do you stand by your evaluation?" Dr. Harrow stood, voice clinical. "Yes, Your Honor. Based on collateral records and reported history, the respondent is at high risk for postpartum impairment." "Collateral records," Lauren repeated under her breath. "Lies!" Another contraction ripped through her. She gripped the edge of the table, fighting not to cry out. Ms. Patel squeezed her elbow. "Stay with me," she murmured. Evelyn leaned toward Conrad. Lauren couldn't hear their words, but she saw Conrad's hand shake as he opened his phone under the table. His eyes flicked to the recording monitor again, like he was afraid of it. Then, as the clerk stepped away to print something, Lauren caught a fragment from the Carrington side, two attorneys whispering too close to the aisle. "Security audio is saved automatically," one muttered. The other answered, low and irritated, "Then make sure the file gets misplaced before Patel requests it." Lauren's stomach went cold, even hotter than the contraction pain. They weren't just trying to win, they were trying to erase the record of what they'd done. And Ms. Patel quietly slid her phone out, hit record, and whispered, "Say nothing, let them hang themselves." Lauren didn't have the luxury of panic. Panic was for people with backup plans. Ms. Patel kept her palm on Lauren's forearm, steadying her through the contraction as if she could anchor her to the earth. "Focus on my voice," she murmured. "In through your nose, out slow." Lauren nodded, eyes glassy, but her mind was working. She kept replaying the whisper she'd overheard. "Security audio, saved automatically. Make sure the file gets misplaced." That wasn't courtroom talk. That was cover-up talk. She forced her gaze away from Evelyn and onto the room itself. The details mattered. The camera above the wall, the red digital clock, the clerk's desk with the monitor and the little black audio recorder wired into it, the bailiff standing near the judge like a human lock. Another contraction rolled in. Lauren bit down on it, tasting metal. Evelyn's attorney walked up to the lectern with a fresh document. "Your Honor, we move to admit Petitioner's Exhibit A, sealed evaluation, and to request an immediate protective order restricting the respondent from contacting the petitioner's family members pending delivery." "Restricting me?" Lauren rasped. "From contacting my own husband?" The attorney didn't acknowledge her. "The respondent's outbursts demonstrate—" "My client is in active labor," Ms. Patel cut in, voice firm. "If the court is going to proceed, we request the official recording be preserved in full and copied to both parties." Evelyn's lead attorney's smile twitched, just once. The judge glanced toward the clerk. "Does this courtroom record automatically?" "Yes, Your Honor," the clerk said. "Audio and timestamps. Standard retention." "Good," Ms. Patel said, as if she'd been waiting for that sentence. She reached into her folder and slid a simple, one-page request across the table. "Then we'd like that noted." Lauren watched Conrad Carrington. He was sweating harder now, his eyes fixed on the clerk's hands as the request was stamped. He didn't look like a man protecting a grandchild. He looked like a man afraid a door had just locked behind him. The bailiff stepped closer to Lauren's side, low voice meant only for her. "Ma'am, if you need medical help, we can call EMS." Lauren swallowed. Do you keep the recordings?" The bailiff's gaze flicked up to the camera, then back to her face. "Not me, but I'll tell you this, nothing disappears the way people think it does." Ms. Patel's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down, then angled the screen so Lauren could see. A text from an unknown courthouse number. "Confirming, hearing audio is mirrored to central server immediately. Request logged." Lauren's breath caught. Mirrored meant copied. Copied meant surviving. Evelyn leaned back, lips tightening, as if she'd just tasted something sour. Lauren's next contraction hit, and with it came a strange, fierce clarity. Across the aisle, Conrad's hand shook as he reached for his briefcase, and a single flash drive slid onto the floor. The flash drive skidded across the polished floor and stopped near Lauren's shoe, like it had been thrown by fate. Conrad didn't move at first. His face tightened, eyes darting to Evelyn. Silent permission, silent threat. Evelyn's gaze stayed forward, but one finger tapped the table once. Conrad's attorney shifted his foot, trying to block the drive from view. Lauren's instinct screamed, "Don't touch anything." But her other instinct, the one that had kept her alive through unpaid bills and closed doors, answered, "If you don't grab what's in front of you, they'll take it away." Another contraction bent her in half. She inhaled, forced herself upright, and slowly nudged the flash drive under her chair with the edge of her shoe. Small move, invisible to most. Ms. Patel saw it anyway. Her eyes flicked down, then back up, and her mouth tightened in a calm, lethal line. The judge looked at Lauren. "Miss Pierce, given your condition, do you wish to request a medical continuance?" Evelyn's attorney jumped in immediately. "Your Honor, we strongly oppose any delay. The respondent's medical episode underscores the urgency. The petitioner is ready to proceed and protect the child." Protect. The word sounded like a lie wearing perfume. Lauren tried to speak, but pain stole her breath. Miss Patel stood. "We are not delaying, but we are requesting the respondent be allowed to remain with counsel at all times and that no party interfere with evidence preservation, including the court's digital recording." Evelyn's lead attorney smiled politely. "Counsel is suggesting interference where none exists." That's when the beige-coated court services woman approached again, clipboard in hand, and leaned toward the judge. The judge nodded once, then addressed Lauren. "Miss Pierce, court services will conduct a welfare and suitability check immediately, today. If necessary, temporary placement will be arranged upon delivery." Lauren's stomach dropped. Arranged meant the Carringtons would be waiting at the hospital with orders already signed. "And," the judge continued, "given the petitioner's request, this court is issuing a temporary restriction. You are not to remove the child from medical supervision or communicate with the petitioner's family without counsel present." Evelyn finally turned her head, just enough to meet Lauren's eyes. No anger, no drama, just quiet certainty, like she'd already named the baby in her mind. Miss Patel leaned close to Lauren's ear. "They're trying to force you into the hospital and into paperwork while you're in pain. Do not sign anything. Not a single page." Lauren's phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "Ambulance is on standby. Behave, or your dad's caregiver gets reassigned." Lauren's throat tightened so hard it hurt worse than the contractions. They had Frank. They had her body. They had the court's momentum. But under her chair she had that flash drive. Ms. Patel slid her hand down, casual as adjusting a file, and hooked the flash drive with 2 fingers into her own folder. Then Evelyn's attorney stood and said, "Your Honor, we move to have Ms. Pierce declared temporarily incompetent to make decisions during labor." Incompetent was the word that made the room tilt. Evelyn's attorney delivered it like a clean weapon, polished and legal. "Your Honor, the respondent is in active labor. She is emotionally distressed and physically compromised. We move to have her declared temporarily incompetent to make decisions, so the court can act in the child's best interest without delay." Lauren's face went hot. Not because she didn't understand the tactic, she did, but because the word carried a stain that would stick. Incompetent meant they could hand papers to a woman in pain and call her signature consent. It meant a hospital room full of strangers and orders already stamped. Ms. Patel rose immediately. "Absolutely not. Labor does not equal incompetence. If this court grants that motion, it sets a dangerous precedent for every pregnant woman who walks through these doors." "Doctor." Harrow cleared his throat from the benches, ready to perform his part. The beige court services woman shifted her clipboard higher, already picturing Lauren's apartment, already imagining the notes she'd write. Lauren breathed through another contraction, jaw clenched. She focused on what was real, the camera blinking above the wall, the judge's microphone, the clerk's stamp, Miss Patel's phone recording, the flash drive, now hidden inside Patel's folder like a heartbeat. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Counsel, on what medical basis are you requesting incompetency?" Evelyn's attorney spread his hands. "The respondent has a documented risk of postpartum impairment based on Dr. Harrow's evaluation." "I never met him," Lauren forced out, voice shaking. "He never examined me." Evelyn finally spoke, calm as prayer. "Lauren, you are proving my point. You're overwhelmed. This is not the time for you to make choices." Overwhelmed, like she was a child, like her motherhood was a privilege Evelyn could revoke. Lauren's gaze slid to Conrad. His face was grey. His eyes kept darting, camera, clerk, judge, like he was waiting for an alarm to go off. He wasn't worried about the baby. He was worried about what the recordings would capture. Ms. Patel leaned close, lips barely moving. "If the judge even considers it, we pivot. We request immediate transfer to medical care under your chosen hospital, and we preserve all court recordings.
They can't isolate you.
Lauren swallowed, pain and fear mixing into something harder. Okay. The judge lifted his pen. Motion noted. I will hear argument. Before he could finish, the courtroom door opened again. A uniformed officer stepped in, held a slip of paper to the clerk, and the clerk's eyes widened. Ms. Patel saw it too. The clerk whispered. The courthouse server just flagged a tampering attempt. The clerk's whisper was barely audible, but it hit the room like a dropped glass. The courthouse server just flagged a tampering attempt. Evelyn's attorney froze for half a second, too long, too stiff, before he recovered and smoothed his expression. Conrad's face drained of color. Dr. Harrow's pen stopped moving. Even the beige-coated court services worker lifted her eyes from the clipboard, startled by the sudden shift in power. The judge leaned forward. Clerk, explain. The clerk swallowed. Your Honor, the audio recording for this hearing is mirrored to the central server. A login from an external device attempted to access the file mid-session. The system flagged it and locked the account. A murmur rose from the benches. People who had been silent a moment ago started whispering, the way a crowd does when they smell a lie. Miss Patel stood slowly, calm as a surgeon. Your Honor, for the record, we request the court preserve all logs showing who attempted access. And we request immediate sanctions if any party or agent interfered with evidence. Evelyn's attorney chuckled softly, like the idea was ridiculous. That's quite an accusation. It's not an accusation, Ms. Patel said. It's a fact the system flagged. We're asking the court to identify the source. Lauren's contraction hit. She gripped the table, eyes watering. But through the pain she watched Evelyn. For the first time, Evelyn's mask slipped. Not panic, not fear, something sharper. Annoyance. Like the court's technology had become an inconvenience she hadn't paid for. The judge's gaze moved across the Carrington table. Counsel, do you have any explanation why anyone connected to this matter would attempt to access the recording? Conrad's attorney opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Conrad reached for a water bottle and missed it, knocking it over. The splash spread across the table, soaking papers. One of the attorneys snatched a document away from the water, too fast, too protective. Lauren saw the corner of it, a hospital letterhead. Evelyn leaned in and murmured to her team, voice low, controlled, "Fix it." Miss Patel's phone vibrated in her palm. She glanced down, then leaned to Lauren, whispering, "The flash drive we grabbed? It's labeled HOSP something, Hospital Coordination." Lauren's stomach turned. So they'd planned this. Court order, hospital handoff, baby transferred like property before she could even hold her child. The judge rapped his gavel once. Bailiff, secure the clerk's station. No one leaves until I have the access log. The bailiff moved, hand near his radio. Evelyn's attorney forced a smile. Your Honor, my client is a respected— Sit, the judge snapped. Lauren exhaled, shaking. For the first time today, the room wasn't leaning toward Evelyn. And that's when the beige-coated court worker quietly turned her clipboard around, revealing a pre-filled placement form already signed. The beige-coated court worker didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply turned her clipboard slightly toward the judge's bench, as if she were confirming a routine detail, and Lauren's stomach dropped when she saw it. A placement form. Already filled out, already signed. Lauren couldn't read every line from where she sat, but she caught the words that mattered. Temporary newborn placement. Petitioner, Evelyn Carrington. Approved, receiving party. She saw a hospital name typed in clean black letters and a date field pre-written with today's date, like the outcome had been decided before Lauren even walked through the courthouse doors. Ms. Patel's eyes snapped to it. For the first time, her calm cracked into something cold. Your Honor, she said, voice sharp, why does court services have a pre-filled placement form if no ruling has been issued? The court worker blinked, then tried to recover. It's standard preparation in high-risk matters. Preparation? Miss Patel repeated. or coordination? Evelyn's attorney leaned forward fast. Your Honor, counsel is trying to dramatize administrative paperwork. The judge's gaze hardened. Ma'am, he said to the court worker, bring that clipboard here. The woman hesitated. Just a beat, enough to show it wasn't routine, enough to show fear. The bailiff stepped closer. Now, he said, not unkind but final. She walked the clipboard up. The judge scanned the form, his jaw tightening. This includes a receiving signature line, he said. Whose signature is this? The court worker swallowed. Mine, Your Honor. In case of what? The judge cut in. A ruling you do not yet have? Evelyn's pearls rose and fell once with a controlled breath. Conrad stared at the floor like a man praying it would open. Miss Patel leaned toward Lauren. This is what I meant, she whispered. They planned a hospital handoff. Lauren's contractions surged again. Pain blurred the edges of the room, but the humiliation stayed razor clear. They were treating her baby like a package with a shipping label. The judge turned to the clerk. Add this to the record, preserve the tampering log, and preserve this form. Counsel for petitioner, you will explain why an unsigned ruling appears to have been pre-executed. Evelyn's attorney's smile failed completely. Your Honor, sit, the judge snapped again. Then Dr. Harrow rose, clearing his throat, eyes on the judge like a man eager to regain control. Your Honor, if I may speak to the respondent's mental state. Ms. Patel's phone vibrated. She glanced down, then looked up at Lauren, eyes widening just slightly. The flash drive, she whispered. It contains a hospital intake note and a name. Lauren's breath caught. The name on the file wasn't Evelyn's. It was Conrad's. The name on the hospital intake note made Lauren's skin go cold. Conrad Carrington. Responsible party. Not grandfather, not emergency contact. Responsible party. Like she was a chart number and the baby was a transfer. Ms. Patel kept her face neutral, but her eyes sharpened. She didn't read it out loud yet. She waited, letting the judge's attention stay on the tampering attempt and the pre-filled placement form, 2 nails already in the Carrington case. Lauren's contraction eased, leaving her shaky and drenched in sweat. The courtroom felt brighter now, as if someone had turned up the lights on the truth. People on the benches leaned forward. Even strangers wanted to see whether money would finally get told no. The judge stared down at the placement form again. This document indicates planning prior to any ruling, he said. That concerns me. Evelyn's attorney tried to laugh it off. Your Honor, wealthy families prepare for contingencies. That's all this is. Ms. Patel stepped forward. Then explain the server access attempt. Explain why court services had a signed placement form ready, and explain why the hospital paperwork lists Conrad Carrington as responsible party before any legal custody exists. Conrad jerked as if he'd been slapped. That's, he started, then stopped. His eyes flicked to Evelyn. Evelyn finally turned her head, voice smooth. Lauren is in labor. There is chaos. My husband was simply ensuring the child receives proper care. Proper care, Lauren whispered, tasting the words like poison. Proper care meant being locked out of her own delivery room. Dr. Harrow rose again, eager. Your Honor, with respect, these administrative details don't change the respondent's risk profile. The judge raised a hand. Doctor, sit. I will decide what matters. That shut him up. For the first time, the expert looked small. Ms. Patel leaned close to Lauren. Do you want to go to the hospital now? She murmured. We can request an ambulance and pause the hearing on medical necessity, but if we do, they'll try to meet you there. Lauren's gaze dropped to her tote. The lockbox inside felt heavier than metal. It felt like her mother's hand on her back. No, Lauren breathed. Not yet. Ms. Patel nodded once. She turned back to the judge, voice steady. Your Honor, we request immediate production of the access logs, and we request petitioner's counsel be ordered to preserve all hospital coordination communications. Evelyn's attorney's smile finally cracked. This is outrageous. The judge's eyes narrowed. Outrageous is planning a removal before a ruling. Lauren's phone buzzed again. Unknown number. 1 sentence. The doctor won't talk. Lauren stared at the screen, heart thudding, because somewhere outside this courtroom, someone was already moving to silence him. The text, "The doctor won't talk," sat on Lauren's screen like a finger pressed to her throat. She didn't know who sent it. She didn't need to. Only one side in this fight benefited from silence, and Evelyn Carrington had built her life on quiet control. Lauren's hands shook as she locked her phone and slid it into her tote, right on top of the lockbox. Pain was one thing. Fear for someone else's life was worse. Miss Patel leaned in, voice low. "They're escalating. If Harrow refuses to testify, they'll rely on the report alone." Lauren swallowed. "Or they're making sure he can't testify." Patel didn't answer, but her eyes said yes. The judge was still focused on the evidence trail, the server tampering flag, the access logs, the pre-filled placement form. He looked down at the clipboard again, then up at the Carrington table. "This court will not tolerate coordinated interference," he said. "I'm ordering the clerk to preserve and print the access logs immediately." Evelyn's attorney stood too quickly. "Your Honor, we object. This is turning into a criminal inquiry." "It became a criminal inquiry when someone tried to alter my courtroom record," the judge snapped. Conrad shifted in his seat, sweat shining on his forehead. He whispered to Evelyn. Evelyn didn't look at him. She stared at Lauren instead, like she was weighing how much pressure it would take to break a person without leaving bruises the court could see. Then Evelyn spoke, her voice soft enough to sound reasonable. "Your Honor, my concern is the child. Miss Pierce is in labor. She is not thinking clearly. A temporary incompetency finding protects everyone involved." Lauren's cheeks burned again. The word tried to crawl into her identity, into the way strangers would remember her. Unstable, incompetent, unfit. Ms. Patel stepped forward. "Your Honor, I'm filing an emergency motion. Given the attempted tampering and pre-coordination, we request a protective order preventing petitioner or any agent from contacting the hospital, the medical staff, or the respondent's father. We also request that any custody order be stayed until after delivery and a full evidentiary hearing." The judge's expression tightened with something like respect. "Noted." Lauren's body clenched, another contraction, stronger, closer. The bailiff moved toward her again. "Ma'am, we need to get you medical care." Lauren nodded, but her eyes stayed on Evelyn. If she left now, Evelyn would try to meet her at the hospital with papers and experts. Miss Patel opened her folder, fingers brushing the flash drive inside. "We have more," she said, calm and deadly. Evelyn's attorney's smile twitched. "More what?" Miss Patel looked at the judge. "Proof they planned the hospital transfer in advance." And Conrad suddenly stood up, voice breaking, and said, "Stop! She doesn't know everything I did." Conrad's sudden confession sucked the oxygen out of the courtroom. "Stop! She doesn't know everything I did," he blurted, voice cracking in a way that didn't match his expensive suit. Every head turned. Evelyn's eyes flashed, sharp as broken glass, but she didn't stand. She didn't need to. Her power had always worked better when she stayed seated. Evelyn's lead attorney jumped up. "Your Honor, my client's husband is under stress." "I'm not under stress," Conrad snapped, then seemed shocked by his own defiance. He swallowed hard and looked straight at Lauren for the first time all morning. I signed the hospital coordination papers. I told them to list me as responsible party. I thought I was preventing chaos." Lauren's laugh came out raw. "Preventing chaos. You tried to steal my baby before I even delivered." Conrad flinched. He glanced at the camera, the clerk, the judge, like he couldn't decide which truth would hurt him least. "Evelyn said it was temporary," he said, quieter. "She said you'd be taken care of. She said you weren't stable enough." Evelyn finally spoke, voice low and lethal. "Conrad, sit down." He didn't. That alone felt like an earthquake. Ms. Patel stepped in smoothly. "Your Honor, the witness is admitting pre-coordination. We request his statement be entered into the record and that petitioner's counsel surrender all related communications, including emails, to the hospital." Evelyn's attorney tried to recover. "This is privileged family discussion." The judge's expression hardened. Not if it involves tampering, pre-executed placement, or coercion. Lauren's next contraction hit hard enough to blur her vision. She gripped the table, breathing fast. The bailiff moved again, ready to call EMS, but Ms. Patel lifted a hand. Wait. Conrad's shoulders sagged. There's more, he said. His eyes flicked toward Dr. Harrow in the benches. The evaluation. Evelyn paid him $200,000 to write it without meeting Lauren. A ripple ran through the courtroom. Real shock, real disgust. Dr. Harrow went still, like prey that heard a twig snap. Evelyn's face remained composed, but her fingers tightened around her pen until her knuckles whitened. You are embarrassing yourself, she murmured to Conrad. Conrad's voice dropped to a whisper, almost prayerful. I'm trying to stop what we started. Miss Patel reached into her folder, pulled out the flash drive and held it up. Your Honor, this contains hospital coordination files and internal notes. We request an immediate forensic copy. The judge nodded once. Granted. Evelyn's attorney leaned toward his client, frantic, and across the room Dr. Harrow stood abruptly, then collapsed into his chair as his phone lit up with one word. Accident. The word accident on Dr. Harrow's phone spread through the courtroom faster than gossip. He stared at the screen, lips parting, then dropped the device into his lap like it burned. His face went grey. He tried to stand again, maybe to speak, maybe to flee, but his knees buckled and he sank back down, trembling. It wasn't the reaction of a man receiving ordinary bad news. It was the reaction of a man realizing his exit had just been sealed. The judge noticed. Doctor, he said sharply, what is the meaning of that message? Dr. Harrow swallowed hard. Nothing, Your Honor. A misunderstanding. Ms. Patel didn't blink. She held up the flash drive like it weighed 100 pounds. Your Honor, with the court's permission, we'd like to submit what we recovered. This drive contains hospital coordination files and an intake note listing Conrad Carrington as responsible party before any custody order existed. Conrad's shoulders sagged, Evelyn's jaw tightened. And, Ms. Patel continued, it includes an email thread, timestamped, showing petitioner's counsel arranging security presence at the hospital and requesting that the respondent be kept separated for paperwork during labor. Lauren's stomach turned. Separated for paperwork. That was the plan. Catch her in pain, isolate her, make her sign. Evelyn's attorney snapped. Objection. Authentication. The judge cut him off. Overruled for preliminary review. Clerk, mark it. Lauren breathed through another contraction, sweat sliding down her back. They were going to take my baby in the hospital, she whispered, voice shaking. Miss Patel leaned in close, steady as steel. Listen to me. They're powerful, but they're sloppy. Money makes people arrogant. Then Patel reached into Lauren's tote, careful, respectful, and touched the dented lockbox. You told me your mother made you promise to keep this safe, she murmured. If there's anything inside that ties you to Harrow or explains why Conrad is panicking, now is the time. Lauren's fingers fumbled at the latch. The metal clicked open with a sound that felt like a door unlocking. Inside were old documents, folded tight. A birth certificate with her mother's maiden name, Hargrove. A faded photo of her mother standing in front of a stone building with the same name etched over the entrance. A bundle of letters signed by a judge, Robert Hargrove, talking about a trust for any biological children. Miss Patel's eyes widened as she read fast. Then she looked at Dr. Harrow, really looked at him. Your Honor, Patel said, voice suddenly clear. Dr. Harrow is not a neutral expert. He is the respondent's blood relative. Her mother was Catherine Hargrove. Dr. Harrow is her uncle. The courtroom went dead silent. Lauren felt something snap into place. Pain, humiliation, fear, forming a single, sharp truth. Ms. Patel gripped her hand. You're not powerless, she whispered. And the judge ordered an emergency hearing for the next morning, this time with subpoenaed bank wires, hospital emails, and Harrow under oath. Lauren didn't sleep that night. After court, the ambulance took her to St. Agnes Hospital under Miss Patel's watch, like she was carrying state secrets instead of a baby. The contractions came harder in the back of the rig, but Lauren kept her eyes open, refusing to give Evelyn a single unguarded moment. Ms. Patel rode beside her, phone charged, copies of the judge's preservation orders folded in her pocket like armor. At the hospital entrance, 2 security guards were already waiting. Too early, too prepared. One of them held a clipboard and asked, "Carrington family?" As if it was a VIP reservation. Ms. Patel stepped forward. "No," she said, voice flat. "Court ordered no contact. Anyone attempting access is in violation." The guards hesitated. Money usually moved them faster than rules, but paper with a judge's signature had weight even here. Ms. Patel handed the charge nurse a copy of the order and said, "If anyone asks to separate her for paperwork, you call me and you call hospital legal." Lauren was wheeled into triage, then labor and delivery. The fluorescent lights made everything look harsh and honest. A nurse checked her dilation and gave her a sympathetic look. "You've been under stress," she said gently. Lauren almost laughed. Stress was an understatement. Stress was when your car wouldn't start. This was a war with pearls and paperwork. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. A photo popped up. Her father's apartment door, shot close, and beneath it a message. "We can still make him testify." Lauren's throat closed. They were still reaching for Frank, still trying to crush her with shame. Miss Patel leaned over the bed and whispered, "Tomorrow morning we go back. We bring the lockbox documents. We subpoena the bank wires. And we force Harrow to answer, on camera, under oath." Lauren's eyes stung. "What if he doesn't show?" "He'll show," Patel said, "because now his name is in the record, and the judge is watching." A nurse hurried in. "Your baby's heart rate is dropping," she said. "We need to move fast." Lauren's fear spiked, raw and animal. She grabbed Miss Patel's sleeve. "Don't let them take her," she pleaded. Patel squeezed her hand. "Look at me," she said firmly. "You're not alone anymore. The court is on notice. The hospital is on notice. And Conrad already cracked." Lauren nodded, breathing through pain, gripping her wedding ring until it hurt. Then the door creaked open. A woman stepped in. Cream coat, pearls, sunglasses removed. Evelyn. She smiled like she belonged there. "Hello, Lauren," she said softly. "Let's make this easy." And behind Evelyn, the nurse's eyes widened as she whispered, "Ma'am, she isn't on the visitor list." Evelyn's smile didn't move, but the nurse's whisper did something to the room. The charge nurse straightened like a door locking. "Ma'am," she said louder, "step back from the patient." Evelyn's eyes flicked to Lauren's swollen belly, then to the IV pole, then to Miss Patel, measuring angles the way she always did. "I'm family," Evelyn said calmly. "I'm here to ensure the baby is safe." Miss Patel didn't raise her voice. "You are under a no-contact order," she said, and handed the nurse the paper with the judge's signature. "If she stays, the hospital is knowingly allowing a court violation." The nurse read one line, and her face changed. "Security," she called toward the hallway. Evelyn's control tightened into steel. "Lauren," she said softly, "don't do this. You're in labor. You're scared. Let adults handle it." Lauren's vision blurred with another contraction, but she forced her eyes open. "Adults don't steal babies," she rasped. 2 security officers arrived, asking for ID. Evelyn gave hers like she was checking into a hotel. The nurse shook her head. "She's not on the list. Remove her." Evelyn's voice dropped, smooth and poisonous. "If you touch me, my lawyers will—" "Not today," the charge nurse said. "Not in my unit." Evelyn was escorted out, still composed, but her perfume lingered like a threat. Miss Patel leaned close to Lauren. "We just created witnesses," she whispered. "Nurses, security logs, camera footage in the hallway." A monitor beat faster. The baby's heart rate dipped again. The OB team moved with practiced urgency. "We're going to the OR," a doctor said. "Now." Lauren grabbed Miss Patel's hand. "Don't let them take her," she pleaded. "They won't," Patel said, voice firm. "I'm calling hospital legal, and the judge's clerk. Every step gets documented. Bright lights, cold air, a curtain. Lauren felt pressure, not pain, and heard the fast, calm voices of people who actually cared about facts. Then, one sharp cry. A nurse lifted a tiny, red-faced baby over the curtain. "It's a girl," she said. "She's here." Lauren sobbed once hard. The baby was placed against her cheek for a heartbeat, warm, real, before being checked and swaddled. Ms. Patel stood at the foot of the bed like a guard. Hours later, Lauren sat upright, pale but steady, hair pulled back, wearing a clean grey cardigan the nurse found in Lost and Found. The lockbox and the flash drive were in Patel's bag. The hospital had printed the visitor logs. Security had saved the hallway footage. The judge's clerk confirmed the emergency hearing was still on for morning. Lauren looked down at her daughter's clenched fist. "We go back," she whispered. "Not to beg, to finish it." And at dawn, Miss Patel opened her folder and said, "Evelyn filed a new motion overnight. She's claiming you're a danger and demanding immediate removal. Today." By 9:12 a.m., courtroom 6B was packed in a way it hadn't been the day before. Word travels fast when a rich family gets caught playing dirty. Lauren sat at the defense table with her newborn daughter asleep against her chest, wrapped in a hospital blanket. The baby's tiny breaths rose and fell, steady as proof that Lauren had already won something no judge could hand her. Ms. Patel stood with a clean stack of exhibits: hospital visitor logs, hallway security footage timestamps, the courthouse tampering report, and the lockbox document sealed in a clear sleeve. Evelyn arrived late on purpose, dressed in black like a funeral. Her attorneys formed a wall again, but the confidence was thinner now. Conrad looked like he hadn't slept. Dr. Harrow wasn't there. The judge opened the hearing without small talk. "We are here because this court received a tampering flag during yesterday's session and because court services presented a pre-filled placement form." His eyes cut to Evelyn's side. "This is not a theatre. This is custody." Ms. Patel called the first witness, the hospital charge nurse. Calm, professional, credible. She testified that Evelyn appeared in labour and delivery despite not being on the approved list, that staff requested security, and that the incident was logged under policy. Ms. Patel submitted the visitor log and the hallway camera timestamp. Then, Ms. Patel called courthouse IT. The technician confirmed the mirrored recording system and identified the attempted access: username, device fingerprint, and timestamp. The courtroom got quiet, in the way people do when numbers replace opinions. Ms. Patel held up a bank wire record. $200,000, she said, from Evelyn Carrington's personal account to a shell company connected to Dr. Harrow. Evelyn's attorney objected. The judge overruled. Conrad stood without being called. "It's true," he said hoarsely. "I signed the hospital coordination. I thought I was protecting the family. I was wrong." Evelyn's face didn't change, but her eyes went flat. "Conrad," she murmured, "don't." Ms. Patel opened the lockbox packet. "And the final piece, Dr. Harrow is not a neutral evaluator. He is Lauren's blood relative through her mother's Hargrove line." The judge leaned back, disgusted. So the court was handed a paid report from a conflicted source, alongside a prearranged newborn placement. He raised his gavel. Petitioner's emergency motion is denied with prejudice. A protective order is granted. Court services is referred for review, and this matter is forwarded to the district attorney for investigation of tampering and fraud. Evelyn stood at last, voice sharp. "You think you've won? Fine. Then let's see how she parents. With "Ma'am," he said to Evelyn, "retaliation against a protected party in an ongoing proceeding is not clever. It's actionable." Evelyn's attorney tried to pivot. "Your Honor, a private employer may—" "Not when it's coerced," the judge cut in. He turned to Ms. Patel. "Counsel, do we have verification?" Ms. Patel nodded and stood. "Yes, we subpoenaed the cafe's phone logs overnight. The owner received 3 calls from petitioner's office within the hour. The final call included a threat. Terminate her today or expect an inspection that shuts you down." We also have the voicemail saved and timestamped. A low sound moved through the benches. Disgust, then satisfaction. People recognized the pattern. Bully, then pretend it was business. The judge looked at the bailiff. Have courthouse security collect that envelope as evidence. Add it to the referral packet. Evelyn's face tightened. For the first time, she looked less like a queen and more like a gambler watching the house rules change mid-game. Lauren didn't stand. She didn't have to. She simply adjusted her daughter against her chest, feeling the baby's warmth settle her shaking hands. The humiliation that had started this nightmare, being labeled unfit in public, was dissolving under real witnesses, real logs, real recordings. The judge issued the final orders, crisp and clear. Permanent no contact for Evelyn and her agents, immediate dismissal of the emergency petition, a court notice to St. Agnes Hospital confirming Lauren's sole parental authority absent a new hearing, and an expedited schedule for child support proceedings against Charlie Carrington, served properly, on record, with consequences if ignored. Then he did something Lauren didn't expect. He looked directly at her. "Ms. Pierce," he said, voice softer, "this court acknowledges you were targeted because you were vulnerable. That is not a crime. That is not incompetence. That is survival." Lauren's throat burned. Ms. Patel squeezed her shoulder. Outside the courtroom, her phone buzzed. Gus from St. Bridget's Cafe. "Ignore the envelope. I heard the voicemail. Your job's yours. Come back when you're ready. Coffee's on me." Lauren closed her eyes, one tear slipping free. Not from pain this time, from relief. She walked out with her baby, her lawyer, and a paper trail strong enough to break a dynasty. And for the first time in months, she wasn't bracing for the next hit.